We live in an era that celebrates acceleration, faster growth, faster returns, faster success. The language of modern wealth is built around speed. Venture capital demands scale. Markets reward momentum. Social media amplifies the loudest financial wins. If something is rising quickly, it must be valuable. If someone builds money rapidly, they must be exceptional. At least that is the narrative we've grown used to. In the United States, ambition is often measured by velocity, and startups are praised for exponential growth. Investors are admired for aggressive returns. Individuals are encouraged to level up constantly, earn more, invest more, scale more. There is nothing inherently wrong with drive. In fact, ambition has built some of the most innovative companies in the world. But speed carries a cost that is rarely discussed. When growth becomes the primary objective, stability becomes secondary. When returns are prioritized, risk is often underestimated. And when visibility becomes currency, sustainability quietly fades into the background. Over the last few decades, we've witnessed cycles of rapid financial ascent, followed by equally rapid collapse. The dot-com boom of the late 1990s created overnight millionaires and wiped many of them out just as quickly. The housing bubble of 2008 promised easy wealth through leverage, until it didn't. More recently, waves of speculative enthusiasm have surged through markets, creating headlines about life-changing gains while quietly leaving others exposed. These patterns are not unusual. They are part of financial history, but they reveal something important. Wealth built on speed alone is fragile. This is where Japan offers an interesting contrast. Japan is not typically associated with flamboyant billionaires or sudden financial explosions. It is not the global symbol of overnight wealth. Instead, it is known for something less dramatic: stability, discipline, and longevity. The quiet endurance of institutions and households that think in decades rather than quarters. Japan has more companies that are over 100 years old than any other country in the world. Many of them are family-owned businesses that have survived wars, recessions, and global market shifts. Their goal was never to dominate headlines. It was to remain steady. That cultural preference did not appear randomly. After World War II, Japan rebuilt from devastation. Stability was not a luxury, and it was a necessity. Later, in the late 1980s, Japan experienced one of the largest asset bubbles in modern history. Real estate and stock prices soared to extreme levels. Optimism was everywhere. And then the bubble collapsed, ushering in what became known as the lost decades. When you experience both rapid ascent and prolonged stagnation, your relationship with risk changes. What followed was not a rejection of wealth, but a recalibration of it. In many Japanese households, his wealth is less about excitement and more about insulation. Less about display and more about protection. Less about maximizing returns and more about minimizing vulnerability. The emphasis shifts from how much can I make to how secure can I remain. This audiobook is not an argument against growth, nor is it a critique of American financial culture. The United States has created extraordinary opportunity through innovation and boldness. But boldness without foundation can become volatility. And volatility over time erodes peace of mind. What we're exploring here is not a geographic formula, it's a philosophical one. What if wealth is not something to chase, but something to construct carefully? What if financial success is less about timing the perfect surge and more about surviving every downturn? What if the quietest strategies are the ones that last the longest? Japan's approach to money does not promise rapid transformation. It offers something subtler: durability. And in a world obsessed with speed, durability may be the most underrated financial asset of all. As we move through this discussion, the goal is not to imitate another culture blindly. It is to examine what happens when stability becomes the foundation of wealth rather than the byproduct of it. Because when wealth is built quietly, it often endures loudly across generations, and that changes the conversation entirely. Chapter 1. Fast money culture is built on visibility. Modern financial culture does not simply reward growth, it rewards visible growth. There is an important difference. A retirement account compounding quietly at a steady rate rarely becomes a topic of admiration. A diversified portfolio growing predictably over 20 years does not generate headlines. But a stock that doubles in a month, a startup that exits suddenly, or a trader who captures a sharp rally. Those stories travel fast. Mr. Visibility amplifies speed. And over time, visibility reshapes what we believe is normal. When dramatic financial wins are constantly displayed, slow progress begins to feel inadequate. A steady 8% annual return feels unimpressive when compared to a headline about someone making 50% in a week. A disciplined savings plan feels insignificant next to stories of overnight success. This distortion is subtle but powerful. In the United States especially, the ambition and public visibility often move together. Entrepreneurial culture praises rapid scaling. Investors pursue outsized returns. Quarterly earnings are analyzed publicly. Even personal finance content tends to highlight extreme transformations rather than consistent discipline. The underlying message becomes clear: if you are not accelerating, you are falling behind. But acceleration without foundation introduces fragility. Financial history repeatedly shows that momentum attracts attention, and attention can inflate confidence beyond reality. The dot-com boom of the late 1990s rewarded projected growth over profitability. Valuations soared on expectations. When conditions shifted, many of those companies disappeared just as quickly as they had appeared. In 2008, leverage amplified housing gains for years. Rising prices reinforced belief. Easy credit encouraged expansion. When the cycle reversed, the leverage magnified losses just as efficiently. More recently, waves of speculative enthusiasm have surged through markets, fueled by instant information sharing. Gains spread rapidly across platforms. Losses tend to fade quietly from discussion. Speed, once again, became the focus. Japan experienced its own lesson in the late 1980s. Asset prices climbed dramatically. Optimism felt justified. Credit was abundant. The Nikkei index reached historic highs. For a time, it appeared unstoppable. As then the bubble collapsed. Stock prices fell sharply. Real estate values declined for years. The economic slowdown lasted far longer than many expected. What followed became known as the lost decades. That period reshaped financial behavior. When a society collectively experiences prolonged volatility, its relationship with speed changes. Growth is no longer admired without question. Risk is no longer casually embraced. Stability begins to matter more than acceleration. And in the decades that followed, Japanese corporate culture leaned toward balance sheet strength rather than aggressive expansion. Households maintained higher savings rates. Risk tolerance became more measured. Financial decisions were filtered through the lens of endurance rather than excitement. This contrast reveals something essential. Fast money culture asks, how quickly can this grow? Sustainable wealth culture asks, how well can this survive? For individuals, this difference plays out in everyday choices. Do you increase lifestyle expenses immediately after earning more? Or do you reinforce your savings first? Do you concentrate capital into high volatility assets seeking large gains, or diversify to reduce exposure? Do you scale aggressively using debt, or grow within stable margins? These are not purely moral questions, they are structural ones. Visibility favors acceleration. Longevity favors margin. Margin is rarely exciting, and it does not produce dramatic stories. But margin creates resilience, the ability to absorb shocks without collapsing. It allows investments to be held through downturns. It allows businesses to endure weak cycles. It allows households to remain calm when markets fluctuate. Acceleration magnifies both gains and losses. Without sufficient margin, speed becomes dangerous. The lesson is not that rapid growth is inherently wrong. Innovation and bold expansion have created enormous prosperity, and particularly in the United States. Speed can be transformative when supported by strength, but strength must come first. If the foundation is thin, acceleration amplifies instability. If the foundation is solid, growth becomes sustainable. The real question is not whether fast money exists. It is whether your financial structure can withstand what happens when the momentum slows. And that is where quiet wealth begins. Not with how quickly you can rise, but with how securely you can remain standing. Chapter 2. Wealth as stability, not excitement. In many modern economies, wealth is closely associated with lifestyle expansion. A raise often leads to a larger home. A bonus becomes a new vehicle. A successful year becomes a visible upgrade. Financial progress is frequently expressed through consumption. The logic seems reasonable. If income increases, living standards should increase as well. But lifestyle expansion quietly changes the structure of risk. When expenses rise with income, flexibility shrinks. Fixed obligations increase, mortgages grow, car payments expand, subscriptions multiply. What once felt like progress gradually becomes pressure. The shift is subtle. At first, higher spending feels like reward, then it becomes maintenance. Eventually, it becomes dependency. In the United States, this pattern is common enough to be almost invisible. Income growth and lifestyle growth often move together. Credit availability accelerates the process. Homes are financed over decades. Vehicles are leased on rolling cycles. Consumption is normalized, and borrowing is socially accepted. There is nothing inherently irresponsible about using credit. In fact, credit has enabled extraordinary mobility and opportunity in the American economy. But when debt funds lifestyle rather than productive assets, stability becomes fragile. Japan traditionally approached this dynamic differently. Cultural norms in Japan have long favored modest public presentation. High earners often live in ways that do not dramatically differ from their neighbors. Luxury exists, but it is often private. Consumption is measured. Social pressure to display wealth is significantly lower. This restraint is not necessarily rooted in scarcity. It is rooted in structure. When lifestyle remains controlled, income volatility becomes survivable. When household expenses are predictable and moderate, the unexpected disruptions do not immediately threaten security. Stability becomes embedded in the design of daily life. To understand this difference, consider how financial stress operates. Financial stress is not solely about income. It is about the gap between obligations and resilience. Two individuals can earn the same salary, yet experience radically different levels of pressure. The difference often lies in fixed commitments. And if one household requires nearly all of its monthly income to sustain its lifestyle, even a minor disruption can create crisis. If another household lives well below its means, disruption becomes inconvenience rather than catastrophe. Japan's post-bubble economic environment reinforced this mindset. After the asset collapse in the 1990s, prolonged stagnation reshaped expectations. Lifetime employment became less certain. Asset appreciation could no longer be assumed. Stability required intentional management. Savings buffers became cultural norms. Conservatism in spending became rational. This created a different definition of wealth. Wealth was not excitement, it was insulation. insulation against job loss, insulation against market downturns, insulation against unpredictable shocks. For many Americans, financial planning begins with growth targets, higher returns, higher income, larger portfolios. In Japan's more conservative framework, planning often begins with risk containment, emergency reserves, modest leverage, long-term commitments that are sustainable even under stress. The distinction matters because stability alters behavior. When a person feels financially stable, decisions become calmer. Investment choices are less reactive. Career moves are evaluated more thoughtfully. Opportunities can be pursued strategically rather than desperately. Without stability, urgency dominates. Urgency drives risk-taking. So urgency fuels speculation. Urgency increases susceptibility to hype. When obligations are high and buffers are low, the appeal of fast money intensifies, not necessarily because of greed, but because of pressure. This is one reason lifestyle restraint becomes a powerful wealth strategy. It reduces urgency. A 6 to 12-month emergency fund may not generate visible returns. It does not produce headlines, but it produces something more valuable: optionality. Optionality allows you to leave a misaligned job without panic. It allows you to hold investments during downturns. It allows you to make long-term decisions without short-term fear dictating behavior. Japanese household savings rates historically reflected this preference for cushion. While those rates have shifted over time, the underlying cultural memory remains. Financial security is built first on stability, then on growth. Another important distinction lies in the concept of enough. In American culture, upward mobility is often framed as an endless ascent. There is always another tier, another neighborhood, another benchmark. The pursuit of more can become perpetual. In Japan, there has traditionally been greater acceptance of sufficiency. This does not mean a lack of ambition. It means recognizing when stability and quality of life outweigh incremental consumption. The psychological impact is profound. When enough is defined clearly, spending becomes intentional. When more is undefined, comparison becomes endless. Comparison fuels expansion. Expansion fuels obligation. Obligation fuels pressure. Pressure then makes fast money appear necessary. If wealth is defined as insulation rather than excitement, priorities shift. Instead of asking, "What can I upgrade?" the question becomes, "What strengthens my foundation?" Instead of maximizing lifestyle today, the focus turns toward preserving flexibility tomorrow. This does not require austerity. It requires alignment. Alignment between income and expenses. Alignment between risk tolerance and investment strategy. Alignment between long-term goals and short-term decisions. A stable financial life may appear unremarkable from the outside. There may be no dramatic leaps, no viral success stories, but internally it creates calm. And calm compounds. Calm improves judgment. Improved judgment reduces mistakes. Fewer mistakes preserve capital. Preserved capital compounds steadily. Over decades, this effect becomes significant. The Japanese model does not eliminate ambition. It reframes it. Success is measured by endurance rather than spectacle. A business surviving across generations is more admired than one that peaks quickly and disappears. A household free from chronic financial stress is valued more than one temporarily elevated by leverage. In practical terms, adopting this approach might mean maintaining controlled fixed expenses even as income grows. Yes, avoiding lifestyle debt that creates dependency on continuous earnings. Building meaningful cash reserves before increasing risk exposure. Viewing financial growth as a byproduct of structural stability rather than a race. None of these steps generate immediate excitement, but they create durability. Durability is rarely glamorous. It does not trend. It does not invite applause. Yet durability is what allows wealth to persist across economic cycles. Excitement can create momentum. Stability preserves progress, and in the long arc of financial life, preservation often matters more than acceleration. Chapter 3. Kaizen and the quiet power of compounding. Most people look for financial breakthroughs, a raise that changes everything, an investment that multiplies quickly, a business idea that suddenly scales. The imagination is drawn to leaps. But wealth, in its most durable form, rarely grows in leaps. It grows in layers. This is where the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen becomes relevant. Kaizen simply means continuous improvement. Small, consistent refinements made over time. And in manufacturing, it transformed companies like Toyota into global leaders. Instead of relying on dramatic overhauls, Toyota focused on incremental adjustments, improving efficiency by 1%, reducing waste slightly, refining processes daily. 1% does not sound impressive, but 1% repeated consistently becomes transformative. The same principle applies to personal finance. In fast money culture, financial progress is often framed as a dramatic event. Not you hit it big. You level up. You scale. The language itself implies sudden expansion. Kaizen implies something quieter, steady calibration. Instead of doubling income overnight, you increase skills gradually. Instead of timing the perfect market entry, you invest consistently. Instead of cutting expenses drastically once, you refine spending behavior over years. This shift changes psychology. When financial success depends on rare breakthroughs, you wait. You hope. You speculate. Your progress is tied to events outside your control. When financial success depends on incremental refinement, you act daily. Your progress becomes predictable. It becomes behavioral rather than situational. Consider the concept of dollar-cost averaging, widely used in the United States. An investor contributes a fixed amount to diversified investments regularly, regardless of market conditions. Over time, volatility smooths out. Emotional timing errors decrease. The system does the work, so it is not exciting. But it works. Kaizen applies beyond investing. It applies to earning power as well. Many Americans pursue large career jumps. A major promotion, a new industry pivot, a high-risk entrepreneurial leap. These moves can be powerful, but they are also unpredictable. A Kaizen approach to income would look different. It would focus on skill stacking, small certifications, incremental leadership responsibilities, network expansion, gradual reputation building. Over a decade, should these modest upgrades compound into substantial earning power. The difference is time horizon. Breakthrough thinking asks, what changes my income this year? Compounding thinking asks, what strengthens my earning capacity for the next 20 years? The Japanese economic experience reinforces this mindset. After the asset bubble collapse, rapid appreciation could no longer be assumed. Growth required discipline. Businesses optimized efficiency rather than chasing explosive expansion. The continuous improvement replaced speculative acceleration. For individuals, this principle has powerful implications. Small percentage increases in savings rates create large long-term differences. Increasing a savings rate from 10% to 12% may feel minor, but over 30 years, that adjustment significantly shifts financial outcomes. Reducing recurring expenses slightly, negotiating insurance, refinancing high-interest debt, to minimizing unused subscriptions does not generate excitement. Yet over decades, these refinements accumulate. Financial compounding is not dramatic. It is mathematical. But psychological compounding may be even more important. When you build the habit of incremental improvement, you reduce dependence on dramatic change. You stop searching for the perfect opportunity. You begin strengthening the system you already have. Systems outperform surges. In a single profitable year does not create wealth if it is followed by instability. A steady 20-year pattern, even at moderate growth, creates something far more resilient. There is also a behavioral advantage. When progress is incremental, it feels manageable. Large financial transformations can be intimidating. They require courage, capital, and sometimes luck. Small improvements require consistency. Consistency is within reach. Kaizen reduces emotional volatility. And instead of celebrating extreme gains and fearing extreme losses, you focus on refinement. You evaluate your financial structure annually. You adjust contributions, you rebalance investments, you increase skill depth, you eliminate inefficiencies. The cumulative effect becomes visible only over time. In American culture, patience can feel like stagnation. We are accustomed to quarterly metrics, annual performance reviews, short feedback loops. But wealth operates on longer cycles. A 25-year-old who improves savings, skills, and investments slightly each year may not appear impressive at 30. By 45, the compounding becomes undeniable. Japan's long-lived companies embody this patience. Many family businesses have operated for generations not because they experienced explosive growth, but because they avoided catastrophic mistakes and improved continuously. Avoiding catastrophic mistakes may be the most underrated financial strategy. Speculation amplifies both gains and losses. Continuous improvement reduces the likelihood of irreversible damage. When you optimize steadily, you protect downside while allowing upside to accumulate. This mindset reframes ambition. Ambition does not disappear, it becomes disciplined. Instead of asking, "How can I multiply quickly?" you begin asking, "What small refinement strengthens my position this year?" Instead of pursuing extreme outcomes, you pursue durable progress. Over time, having durable progress becomes wealth. Compounding rewards time. Time rewards discipline. Discipline rewards consistency. And consistency, though rarely celebrated publicly, is often the quiet engine behind long-term financial independence. The power of Kaizen is not that it is dramatic, it is that it is sustainable. And sustainability, more than excitement, is what allows wealth to endure. Chapter 4. Japan versus America. Two financial philosophies, two risk profiles. When we compare Japan and the United States financially, it is tempting to reduce the difference to numbers. GDP, debt ratios, stock market performance, savings rates. But the real difference is philosophical. The United States was built on expansion. Japan, especially post-war Japan, was rebuilt on preservation. That distinction shapes everything. In America, economic identity is closely tied to growth. New startups aim to scale rapidly. Investors seek outsized returns. Consumers are encouraged to upgrade. The system rewards velocity. Venture capital thrives on the possibility of exponential upside. Even personal branding is tied to acceleration. Income milestones, portfolio growth, visible wins. Risk is tolerated because reward can be extraordinary. In Japan, financial behavior evolved differently. After experiencing both national devastation and an extreme asset bubble collapse, a cultural memory leaned toward caution. Corporate governance emphasized stability. Households prioritized savings buffers. Debt was approached with restraint. Longevity became a form of achievement. Neither model is inherently superior, but they produce different risk profiles. In the United States, leverage is normalized. Mortgage debt is common and often strategic. Business debt fuels expansion. Student loans are accepted as investment in earning power. Credit cards are widely used. The system functions efficiently because confidence in growth remains strong. In Japan, household leverage historically remained lower. Savings were prioritized. Real estate speculation became less culturally attractive after the 1990s collapse. Financial conservatism was not simply a habit, it was learned experience. The American model assumes growth. The Japanese model assumes uncertainty. That assumption changes behavior. If you assume growth, borrowing feels logical. You expect future income to be higher, you expect assets to appreciate, you expect markets to reward risk over time. If you assume uncertainty, borrowing feels dangerous. You prioritize liquidity. You avoid commitments that restrict flexibility. You design life around resilience. This difference is visible in business strategy as well. American companies often pursue aggressive scaling. Market share matters, speed matters, dominance matters. If growth slows, leadership changes. If returns dip, pressure increases. Japanese companies often emphasize continuity. Many family-owned firms plan across generations rather than quarterly cycles. Profitability is important, but endurance may be even more so. Employment relationships historically reflected long-term commitment rather than rapid turnover. These structural differences influence personal wealth building. An American professional might think, how can I maximize income growth over the next 5 years? A Japanese professional might think, how can I ensure financial security over the next 20? The time horizon shifts the strategy. Shorter horizons favor higher risk for higher return. Longer horizons favor durability. There is also a cultural difference in how wealth is displayed. In the United States, visible success often signals achievement. Large homes, luxury vehicles, and lifestyle upgrades. These are interpreted as indicators of progress. Social mobility is celebrated publicly. In Japan, modesty remains deeply embedded in social norms. Displaying wealth aggressively can be viewed as socially disruptive rather than admirable. As a result, wealth often stays understated. The psychological consequence is important. When wealth is visible and celebrated, comparison intensifies. Comparison fuels consumption. Consumption increases fixed costs. Fixed costs increase vulnerability. When wealth is private and understated, comparison weakens. Spending decisions become less competitive. Lifestyle inflation slows. The American system produces extraordinary innovation. It also produces volatility. The Japanese system produces stability. It can also produce slower growth. Each system reflects trade-offs. For an individual listening to this audiobook in the United States, the lesson is not to abandon American dynamism, and it is to recognize which elements create fragility. Fast scaling without buffer creates fragility. Lifestyle inflation without margin creates fragility. Leverage without liquidity creates fragility. Japan's long period of economic stagnation, often called the lost decades, is sometimes used as evidence that caution limits growth. That interpretation misses something important. During stagnation, catastrophic collapse was largely avoided. Social order remained stable. As household systems adapted, the emphasis shifted toward sustainability rather than speculation. Stability may not create headlines, but it preserves continuity. In contrast, American cycles often swing more dramatically. Rapid expansion followed by sharp correction. The system rebounds quickly, but the volatility can be intense. The deeper question becomes personal. Which environment do you want to design for your own financial life? Do you want a system that depends on constant acceleration, or one that remains functional even when acceleration stops? Most individuals do not control macroeconomic systems, but they control personal structure. You can adopt American ambition with Japanese insulation. You can pursue growth while protecting margin. You can invest in innovation without overextending lifestyle. The contrast between Japan and the United States is not about choosing one model entirely. It is about understanding risk exposure. Speed magnifies opportunity. Stability absorbs shock. If you build a life dependent on uninterrupted growth, downturns become dangerous. If you build a life prepared for fluctuation, downturns become manageable. The quiet insight from Japan is this: financial life should remain stable even when markets are not. That principle does not limit ambition, it disciplines it. And discipline, though less visible than acceleration, often determines who remains standing when cycles turn. Chapter 5. Kakeibo and the Discipline of Money Awareness. Before money grows, it moves, and most people do not truly see where it moves. In many American households, income is tracked carefully. Paychecks are monitored, investment returns are reviewed. Net worth is calculated, but daily spending often happens automatically. Subscriptions renew silently, small purchases accumulate. Convenience replaces intention. Spending becomes frictionless. The digital payment systems have made transactions nearly invisible. A tap, a click, a swipe, and the money is gone. The psychological distance between earning and spending has widened. Because the transaction is painless, the impact feels abstract. This is where the Japanese concept of Kakeibo offers something different. Kakeibo, first introduced in Japan in 1904 by journalist Hani Motoko, is a method of conscious household budgeting. It is not simply a spreadsheet, it is a ritual of awareness. At its core, Kakeibo asks 4 questions. How much money do you have? How much would you like to save? How much are you spending? How can you improve? The simplicity is intentional. Rather than relying on complex financial software, traditional Kakeibo encourages writing expenses by hand, categorizing them deliberately, reviewing them monthly. The act of writing slows spending down. It forces reflection. This is not about restriction, it is about visibility. In American financial culture, growth is often emphasized over tracking. People focus on increasing income or chasing higher returns. Spending habits are adjusted reactively, often after debt accumulates or stress appears. Kakeibo reverses the sequence. It begins with awareness. Expenses are typically grouped into categories such as necessities, optional spending, culture or enrichment, and unexpected costs. The purpose is not judgment, it is pattern recognition. When patterns become visible, behavior changes naturally. So consider how many Americans discover recurring charges months after subscribing. Streaming platforms, digital services, memberships, each individually small, collectively significant. Without deliberate review, these expenses persist unnoticed. Kakeibo interrupts autopilot. It transforms spending from impulse to decision. The deeper effect is psychological. When you manually record purchases, you experience the cost differently. While writing down a $45 restaurant meal feels different from tapping a card. Writing down 5 small purchases over a week reveals accumulation that might otherwise go ignored. Awareness reduces emotional spending. In high-speed consumer economies, marketing is sophisticated and constant. Advertising does not merely promote products, it shapes identity. Consumption becomes self-expression. Buying feels like progress. Convenience becomes default, without awareness. And spending aligns with impulse rather than intention. Kakeibo aligns spending with purpose. This is particularly powerful in environments where income rises over time. In the United States, income growth often leads to lifestyle inflation. Expenses expand gradually and invisibly. Over years, fixed costs increase to match earnings. Awareness slows that expansion. When every expense is visible, lifestyle choices become deliberate. You begin to ask whether purchases align with values or simply satisfy momentary desire. You begin to see trade-offs clearly. Every dollar spent is a dollar not invested. Every subscription is a long-term commitment. Every lifestyle upgrade carries future obligation. These realizations are not meant to create fear. They create clarity. Clarity reduces regret. In Japan, where social norms discourage excessive display, consumption has traditionally been less competitive. While modern Japan certainly participates in global consumer culture, the cultural baseline has long emphasized moderation. This moderation, combined with Kakeibo-style tracking, reinforces stability. In the United States, consumer culture is more aggressive. Retail credit is accessible. Marketing cycles are fast. Social comparison is amplified by digital platforms. Without deliberate awareness, spending can expand unconsciously. The difference is not moral, it is structural. Whose frictionless systems encourage spending. Reflective systems encourage restraint. Kakeibo introduces friction intentionally. Friction is not a barrier to happiness, it is a safeguard for intention. Financial awareness also influences saving behavior. When you know precisely how much you spend, savings targets become realistic rather than aspirational. Instead of vaguely hoping to save more, you adjust specific categories. Small reductions accumulate. Over time, awareness compounds. A household that saves an additional $200 per month because of improved tracking may not feel dramatically different in 1 year. Over 10 or 20 years, invested consistently, that difference becomes substantial. More importantly, awareness builds discipline. Discipline is not about saying no to everything. It is about aligning spending with long-term security. When awareness becomes habit, impulse loses influence. There is also a stress reduction effect. Financial anxiety often stems from uncertainty. When people do not know exactly where their money goes, they assume the worst. They feel behind without clear evidence. They react emotionally to minor setbacks. When spending is tracked clearly, uncertainty shrinks. Decisions become data-driven rather than reactive. Emotional spikes decrease. In this way, Kakeibo is less about budgeting and more about self-governance. Self-governance strengthens stability. Stability strengthens confidence. The confidence improves decision-making. The cycle becomes positive rather than reactive. For someone living in the United States, adopting this mindset does not require cultural transformation. It requires intentional review, monthly expense reflection, categorization of spending, clear savings goals before discretionary purchases, periodic elimination of unnecessary commitments. These actions are simple. They are not dramatic. They do not generate social validation, but they create structural strength. And structural strength is what allows growth to be sustainable. In fast money culture, earning more feels like the solution to financial stress. Often, clarity is the real solution. When money becomes visible, behavior becomes adjustable. And when behavior becomes adjustable, wealth becomes controllable. That is the quiet power of awareness. Chapter 6. The Japanese Aversion to Debt and the Culture of Financial Caution. If there is one financial instinct deeply embedded in modern Japanese culture, it is caution toward debt. This caution did not emerge from theory. It emerged from experience. In the late 1980s, Japan experienced one of the largest asset bubbles in modern history. Real estate prices soared. The stock market surged. Credit flowed easily. At the peak, land in Tokyo was valued at extraordinary levels, when optimism was widespread. Borrowing felt justified because prices seemed destined to rise. Then the bubble collapsed. Stock markets fell sharply. Property prices declined for years. Banks were left exposed with non-performing loans. Companies that had expanded aggressively found themselves constrained. What followed was not a short correction, but decades of economic stagnation. That collective memory reshaped national behavior. Unlike cultures that quickly return to speculation after downturns, as Japan internalized the lesson. Households became more conservative. Corporations prioritized balance sheet strength. Financial leverage, while still present, became something approached carefully rather than enthusiastically. In Japan, debt traditionally carried a social weight beyond mathematics. Borrowing was not merely a financial transaction, it was a responsibility tied to honor and obligation. Failing to repay carried not just financial consequence but reputational cost. This cultural undertone made debt psychologically heavier than in many Western economies. Contrast this with the United States. In America, debt is normalized and often strategic. Mortgages are common and encouraged. Student loans are seen as investment in future income. Credit cards are embedded in daily life. Business expansion frequently relies on leverage. In many cases, this system works effectively because growth expectations remain strong. But the cultural framing differs. In the US, debt is often viewed as a tool. In Japan, debt is often viewed as a burden. This distinction shapes behavior. After the 1990s collapse, Japanese households increased savings and reduced speculative borrowing. Companies focused on internal funding and cautious expansion. Even as global markets evolved, a degree of financial conservatism remained embedded. This caution influenced risk tolerance. Japanese investors historically favored savings accounts and low-risk instruments over aggressive stock market exposure. While this approach limited upside during global bull markets, it reduced exposure to severe volatility. The goal shifted from maximizing return to minimizing irreversible damage. This philosophy aligns with a broader Japanese business principle: survival first, profit second. Many Japanese companies that have survived for over a century did not pursue rapid global dominance. So they prioritized continuity. They avoided overextension. They managed debt carefully. They expanded when conditions were favorable, but not at the cost of structural fragility. For individuals, this created a quiet financial template. Keep fixed costs manageable. Avoid borrowing for consumption. Preserve liquidity. Assume that economic cycles will eventually reverse. This mindset may appear overly cautious in high-growth environments. During long bull markets, your conservative investors often feel left behind. When stock indices climb rapidly, when housing prices rise, when startups multiply in valuation, caution can feel like missed opportunity. But Japan's historical memory emphasizes a different fear: overexposure. Overexposure to leverage, overexposure to speculation, overexposure to assumption that growth will continue uninterrupted. The Japanese experience suggests that the danger of excessive debt is not just financial, it is psychological. High leverage amplifies stress. When obligations are fixed and markets fluctuate, emotional volatility increases. Decision-making becomes reactive. Financial caution, by contrast, reduces emotional pressure. Lower leverage means fewer forced decisions. Higher liquidity means more flexibility. Moderate commitments mean more resilience. This does not imply that all debt is harmful. Even in Japan, mortgages and corporate loans exist. But the cultural baseline leans toward prudence rather than enthusiasm. The difference becomes particularly visible during downturns. In highly leveraged systems, downturns trigger cascading effects: forced asset sales, bankruptcies, job losses, panic. In more conservative systems, adjustments occur more slowly. Growth may stall, but collapse is less dramatic. Japan's prolonged stagnation after its bubble was painful, but it did not result in systemic chaos. Social stability remained intact. The financial system adapted gradually rather than imploding. That outcome reflects a philosophy: avoid catastrophic loss, even if it means accepting slower growth. For someone in the United States listening to this, the lesson is not to reject leverage entirely. It is to question dependence. Are your financial commitments sustainable without perfect conditions? Would a temporary income disruption create panic? Are you borrowing to build assets or to sustain lifestyle? The Japanese model suggests a simple principle. Debt should expand capacity and not inflate identity. Borrowing to invest in productive skills or durable assets may strengthen long-term earning power. Borrowing to accelerate consumption increases vulnerability. When obligations remain modest, opportunity becomes optional rather than urgent. Financial calm becomes possible. And calm, over decades, often proves more valuable than aggressive acceleration. Japan's caution toward debt is not about fear of growth. It is about respect for cycles. Cycles rise, cycles fall. The leverage magnifies both. And in a culture shaped by the memory of dramatic reversal, magnification is approached carefully. That restraint, while less visible than ambition, is one of the quiet foundations of Japanese wealth. Chapter 7. The Psychology of Enough and How Japan Defines Financial Success. In many cultures, success is measured by visible expansion, bigger homes, higher titles, greater net worth, constant upward movement. The definition is dynamic, always moving, always stretching. There is rarely a fixed point where someone says, "This is enough." Japan approaches this question differently. While modern Japan certainly participates in global capitalism, there remains a deep cultural undercurrent shaped by restraint, balance, and moderation. Historically influenced by Confucian values, Buddhist philosophy, and centuries of social hierarchy, Japanese society developed a relationship with status that is quieter than in many Western nations. Wealth, in this framework, is not meant to disrupt social harmony. Harmony matters. In traditional Japanese thought, individual ambition exists within collective structure. An excess display can be seen as imbalance. Public modesty is not merely politeness, it is a cultural stabilizer. Even successful executives often dress conservatively, live discreetly, and avoid overt self-promotion. This creates a different relationship with more. In highly competitive consumer cultures, comparison drives aspiration. If neighbors upgrade, pressure rises. If peers display success, the benchmark shifts. Desire becomes externally calibrated. In Japan, the social norms have historically dampened that calibration. When wealth is understated, comparison loses intensity. If no one is aggressively signaling superiority, the psychological race slows. The concept of enough becomes reachable. This does not imply complacency. Japan is a highly productive society. Work ethic is strong. Education standards are rigorous. Professional dedication is respected. But the end goal is often framed around stability and dignity rather than spectacle. Financial success becomes linked to predictability. Can you provide for your family? Can you meet obligations without stress? Can you maintain respect within your community? Can you live without excessive financial anxiety? These questions shape behavior more than abstract net worth targets. After the asset bubble collapse in the 1990s, the cultural memory reinforced this moderation. Rapid wealth expansion proved fragile. Long-term stability proved safer. And families observed how speculative optimism could evaporate. As a result, aspiration recalibrated. Instead of chasing dramatic appreciation, many households prioritized savings consistency. Instead of equating wealth with high-risk opportunity, they equated it with peace of mind. Peace of mind became a form of capital. In American culture, financial ambition is often future-oriented and expansive. Retirement targets climb, portfolio goals stretch, success stories feature exponential outcomes. More is an open-ended objective. Without a defined endpoint, enough remains elusive. The psychological consequence is subtle but powerful. If enough is undefined, satisfaction is temporary. Income increases, but comparison shifts. Assets grow, but benchmarks rise. Contentment becomes conditional on outperforming peers. In Japan, while not immune to comparison, the social baseline is more restrained. Public modesty reduces pressure to escalate continuously. Wealth is often private. No, success is often quiet. The emotional temperature is lower. Lower emotional temperature influences financial decision-making. When the definition of success is moderate, risk appetite moderates. When ambition is tied to security rather than dominance, financial strategy becomes conservative. Investments are chosen with sustainability in mind. Debt is approached carefully. Lifestyle inflation slows. The enough mindset reduces volatility at both personal and societal levels. As this does not mean Japanese society has eliminated stress or inequality. Modern Japan faces demographic challenges, economic pressures, and shifting global dynamics. But culturally, there remains a preference for balance over flamboyance. Balance stabilizes expectations. Expectations shape behavior. Behavior determines long-term outcomes. In the United States, upward mobility is celebrated. It fuels innovation and productivity, but it also amplifies comparison. And if success is publicly visible and constantly escalating, the internal benchmark rises automatically. This can produce high achievement. It can also produce chronic dissatisfaction. When there is no defined threshold of sufficiency, financial life becomes an endless pursuit. Japan's quieter model suggests an alternative psychological anchor. Define enough early, enough savings to handle emergencies, enough income to support a modest lifestyle, enough assets to avoid dependency. Beyond that, the growth becomes optional rather than mandatory. Optional growth is calmer growth. Calm growth allows compounding to operate without emotional interference. The relationship between enough and time horizon is important. When sufficiency is defined, patience increases. Investments can mature. Careers can develop steadily. Short-term volatility becomes less threatening. Without sufficiency, impatience grows. Returns must be faster. Income must increase quickly. Risk tolerance stretches. The difference is not simply financial, it is existential. But if identity is tied to constant expansion, financial setbacks feel personal. If identity is tied to stability and contribution, fluctuations feel temporary. Japan's approach embeds dignity into stability rather than into accumulation. This perspective influences generational planning as well. Many Japanese families emphasize passing down not only assets, but habits. Frugality, discipline, moderation, respect for resources. Wealth is seen as stewardship rather than conquest. Stewardship reduces urgency. When wealth is something to preserve and maintain, behavior becomes cautious. When wealth is something to conquer and display, behavior becomes aggressive. Neither model guarantees success, but they create different emotional landscapes. For someone living in a fast-paced American economy, adopting the Japanese concept of enough does not require abandoning ambition. It requires redefining success. Instead of asking, "How far can I go?" you might ask, "Then how stable can I become?" Instead of asking, "What do others see?" you might ask, "How secure do I feel?" Instead of allowing comparison to dictate lifestyle, you set a personal threshold of sufficiency. Once that threshold is met, growth becomes strategic rather than reactive. This shift reduces financial anxiety significantly. Anxiety often stems from chasing undefined targets. When targets are defined, progress becomes measurable. satisfaction becomes possible. And Japan's cultural moderation reminds us that wealth is not only accumulation, it is emotional architecture. It is the ability to live without constant financial tension. It is the ability to plan without panic. It is the ability to choose long-term stability over short-term applause. In a world that celebrates acceleration, defining enough may be the most radical financial act. And paradoxically, those who define enough often build more durable wealth. Because they are no longer chasing every surge, they are protecting what matters. There is also a subtle spiritual dimension embedded in the Japanese idea of enough. Traditional Japanese aesthetics often embrace the concept of wabi-sabi, the appreciations of simplicity, imperfection, and impermanence. While not directly financial, this worldview influences how people perceive ownership and accumulation. If everything is temporary, the excessive attachment to material expansion feels unnecessary. Wealth, in this sense, becomes functional rather than symbolic. A home is shelter, not a statement. Savings are protection, not prestige. Investment is continuity, not competition. This philosophy reduces the emotional weight placed on financial comparison. When material display is not central to identity, financial life becomes quieter internally as well as externally. And another important influence is intergenerational responsibility. In many Japanese households, financial decisions are not viewed purely through the lens of personal gratification. There is awareness of family continuity. Parents, children, sometimes even grandparents under one extended framework. Long-term stability is valued because disruption affects more than one individual. When responsibility stretches across generations, the threshold of enough becomes more conservative. The risk is filtered through impact on family stability. Speculation is less appealing when potential downside threatens long-term harmony. Contrast this with highly individualistic financial models, where personal ambition can outweigh collective caution. The Japanese definition of success, therefore, tends to incorporate three elements: stability, respectability, continuity. Accumulation alone does not satisfy these. You can accumulate wealth and still feel unstable. You can accumulate assets and still feel exposed. You can increase income and still lack peace. The idea of enough closes that gap. It defines a point where survival is secure, dignity is intact, and the future is reasonably protected. Beyond that point, growth becomes enhancement rather than necessity. And when growth is no longer driven by necessity, it becomes measured. Measured growth is sustainable growth. This is perhaps the most understated lesson Japan offers. Wealth does not have to be maximal to be meaningful. It only needs to be sufficient to protect what matters. And sufficiency, once understood, becomes a powerful form of financial freedom. Chapter 8. The Japanese Architecture of Sustainable Wealth. When you step back and look at Japan's financial culture as a whole, a pattern begins to emerge. It is not one secret. It is not one tactic. It is not one investment strategy. It is architecture. Japanese wealth is built less like a rocket and more like a structure, layered carefully, reinforced over time, designed to withstand pressure. Architecture is intentional. And intention is what separates sustainable wealth from temporary gain. If we examine the elements that have shaped Japanese financial behavior over the last century, we begin to see a framework: caution toward leverage, preference for savings buffers, cultural modesty and lifestyle, continuous improvement mindset, long generational time horizons, defined concept of enough. Individually, none of these seem revolutionary. Together, they form insulation. In Japan, wealth was never primarily defined by explosive upside. It was defined by durability. After experiencing war, reconstruction, economic bubbles, and prolonged stagnation, the cultural instinct became clear: avoid catastrophic fragility. This instinct influenced business structure. Many Japanese firms operate with strong cash reserves. They are often criticized by global investors for being overly conservative. But that conservatism allows survival during downturns. While high-growth firms may outperform during booms, stable firms endure during contractions. Endurance compounds. On the household level, similar principles apply. Savings are treated as foundation rather than leftover. Debt is approached cautiously. Consumption is moderated by social norms. Risk is filtered through collective memory. The result is not maximum speed. It is reduced volatility. Reduced volatility may appear less impressive in a bull market, but over decades, lower volatility preserves capital, and preserved capital compounds. Compounding thrives on survival. If capital avoids catastrophic loss, even modest returns accumulate meaningfully over time. But if capital is repeatedly exposed to extreme risk, compounding is interrupted. Japan's financial architecture prioritizes continuity over intensity. Intensity is emotional. Continuity is structural. Structural thinking also influences generational planning. Japan has the highest number of companies in the world that have operated for over 100 years. Many of these businesses are not global giants. They are regional enterprises, sack breweries, construction firms, specialty manufacturers that focus on consistency rather than dominance. Their goal is not explosive valuation. It is generational stewardship. Stewardship changes financial decision-making. If your goal is to sell a company quickly, so you may accept higher leverage and aggressive expansion. If your goal is to pass it to your children, you prioritize stability, reputation, and resilience. The time horizon shifts the risk tolerance. For individuals outside Japan, particularly in the United States, the lesson is not to abandon ambition or innovation. The American economy thrives on dynamism, but dynamism without architecture creates fragility. The Japanese model suggests building layers before scaling. Layer 1. Stability, emergency reserves, manageable fixed costs, low lifestyle dependency. Layer 2. Awareness, tracking spending, defining enough, avoiding emotional consumption. Layer 3. Steady growth, disciplined investing, skill improvement, long-term planning. Layer 4. Optional acceleration. Expansion only after foundation is strong. Most people reverse this order. They attempt acceleration first. They build lifestyle around projected income. They add stability only after volatility exposes weakness. Japanese financial culture reverses the sequence. Foundation first, speed later, if necessary. There is also an emotional component to this architecture. Because wealth is not publicly exaggerated, comparison pressure decreases. Because debt is approached carefully, obligations remain manageable. Because sufficiency is defined, ambition becomes measured. Measured ambition is sustainable ambition. So sustainable ambition produces quieter but longer-lasting outcomes. Over time, this approach may not generate headlines. It may not produce dramatic stories of overnight success. But it creates something more subtle and arguably more valuable. Financial calm. Calm investors hold through downturns. Calm households avoid panic borrowing. Calm businesses avoid reckless expansion. Calm is invisible, but calm compounds. When viewed through this lens, Japan's approach to wealth is less about restraint and more about design. Design acknowledges cycles. Markets rise and fall. Industries evolve. Economies expand and contract. Architecture built for permanence assumes fluctuation. In fast money culture, the assumption is often uninterrupted growth. In Japanese financial philosophy, the assumption is eventual disruption. Planning differs accordingly. If disruption is expected, buffers are built. If disruption is ignored, leverage expands. Ultimately, sustainable wealth is not about rejecting growth, it is about sequencing growth correctly. Build insulation. Define enough. Improve steadily. Control leverage. Think generationally. Then, grow within those boundaries. This is the Japanese architecture of wealth. It is not glamorous. It is not loud. It does not promise speed. But it survives, and in the long arc of financial life, survival is what allows prosperity to endure. There is one more dimension to this architecture that is easy to overlook. It is psychological endurance. In highly volatile systems, even when financial outcomes are positive, emotional swings are intense. Rapid gains create euphoria. Sudden losses create fear. Over time, this cycle drains clarity. Decision-making becomes reactive. Long-term planning weakens. Japan's slower, more insulated structure reduces these emotional extremes. When leverage is moderate, downturns hurt less. When lifestyle is controlled, income shocks feel survivable. When enough is defined, comparison loses urgency. This creates a stable mental environment, and mental stability may be the most underrated financial advantage of all. Because wealth is not only about numbers on a balance sheet, it is about the ability to think clearly during uncertainty. It is about the capacity to remain disciplined when others panic. It is about maintaining direction even when markets fluctuate. Architecture supports that clarity. Without structure, emotion leads. With structure, intention leads. The Japanese model demonstrates that when financial life is designed for durability, confidence does not depend on constant growth. It depends on strength. And strength, once established, allows prosperity to unfold at its own pace. We began this journey by questioning speed. Not because speed is wrong, not because ambition is flawed, but because speed, without structure, is fragile. Japan's financial culture does not offer a dramatic secret. It does not promise exponential gains. It does not advertise overnight transformation. What it offers is something quieter and perhaps more durable. It offers design. Across decades marked by reconstruction, rapid expansion, collapse, and stagnation, and Japan adjusted its relationship with money. It learned caution through experience. It embraced modesty not as limitation, but as insulation. It defined enough, not as surrender, but as stability. And in doing so, it built a financial culture that values endurance over excitement. This does not mean Japan avoided hardship. It did not. Nor does it mean the American model is flawed. The United States has generated extraordinary innovation, opportunity, and upward mobility precisely because it embraces dynamism and risk. But risk, unmanaged, creates volatility, and volatility, unmanaged, creates fragility. The Japanese model reminds us that growth and stability are not opposites. They are sequential. Foundation first, acceleration later. If wealth is built without insulation, downturns feel catastrophic. If wealth is built on defined sufficiency, downturns feel survivable. That difference changes behavior. When your expenses are modest, you make calmer career decisions. When your debt is controlled, you weather economic shifts more easily. When your savings are deliberate, you do not panic during market corrections. When enough is clear, comparison loses its power. Financial peace is not accidental. It is engineered, and engineering requires restraint. One of the most subtle lessons from Japan is this: wealth does not need to be loud to be strong. In many societies, financial success is validated publicly, by display, and by scale, by visible expansion. But display does not guarantee durability. Expansion does not guarantee resilience. Durability is built quietly. It is built in disciplined budgeting that no one sees, It is built in savings habits that receive no applause. It is built in resisting unnecessary leverage when others are accelerating. It is built in defining sufficiency before chasing surplus. Over time, these quiet choices compound. They compound not only in financial capital, but in emotional capital. Because perhaps the most valuable outcome of sustainable wealth is not a higher net worth. It is reduced anxiety, it is optionality, it is the ability to think long-term without constant urgency. Japan's philosophy of wealth is not about rejecting growth. It is about respecting cycles. Markets will rise and fall. Industries will expand and contract. Opportunities will appear and disappear. If your financial life depends entirely on uninterrupted acceleration, those cycles will feel threatening. If your financial life is designed for fluctuation, cycles become manageable. The question is not whether you should pursue opportunity. The question is whether your foundation can withstand disappointment. In a world that celebrates rapid ascent, it is easy to forget that many fortunes disappear as quickly as they appear. History is full of dramatic peaks, followed by quiet declines. But history is also full of families, businesses, and communities that remained stable across generations. Not because they chased every surge, but because they avoided irreversible mistakes. That is the deeper lesson here. Wealth is not a race to the highest point. It is the ability to remain standing across time. The Japanese approach teaches us that defining enough, controlling leverage, improving steadily, and thinking generationally are not conservative limitations. They are structural safeguards. They may not produce dramatic stories, but they produce lasting ones. And in the long arc of financial life, lasting matters more than loud. If speed creates opportunity, stability protects it. If ambition drives growth, discipline preserves it. Sustainable wealth is rarely the fastest, but it is often the one that endures. And endurance, in the end, may be the most underrated form of success.